Someone will argue, yes, we can have all this money, but also the expenditure is a different kettle of fish altogether. Yes,
at least the value you've seen the honesty that I was referring to, and the CS has mentioned it clearly, that we no longer have any room. And first thing a government has to do is to be honest with itself. It's honest about it. You've mentioned about accumulating more debt. It's a fact that we are in a treadmill. How do we sustain our financing? Debt is at the center of our financing. We cannot wake up today. No government in Kenya right now can show up right now, even post-27, and say we don't need to borrow.
Yeah, it is
borrowing
reality.
Is constant.
Yeah, we
the
agree.
issue is, and that's what I'm saying, and I think the CS Treasury has mentioned clearly that if we are using 50% of our revenue to repay debt, and that is you are referring to interest. You're not referring to the principal. Because what did they do with the principal? They had to renegotiate and push them all the way to 2035, others to 2045, because we could not, in any possible way, pay the principal together with interest that were due from 2025. So the renegotiation was to push the principal further, but at least be up to date on the interest. The only danger is, if you are spending 50% of your 4 trillion on repaying debt, what development can you do? What food on the table can you put? How can you be able to handle it? Because the core areas will be, for example, health, education, infrastructure. How are you able to do that if you don't have the money to do that? So that then calls for, how do you restructure your portfolio? How do you creatively bring in the private sector? And that also addresses the issue of governance you referred to. Because our governance issue, I think, if you ask me, going to 2027, the president's focus in the second term should be on governance, which would mean, how do we get value for money? There's one thing to control the debt. There's one thing to appropriate the money well. But there's another thing to ensure that the money put is done. The beauty about something like National Infrastructure Fund, when you have a PPP, the government control over it is reduced, which then brings in efficiency. For example, let me use what has worked. KenGen and Kenya Power have been a success simply because of divestiture. Before then, how many times was Kenya Power always trending for all the bad oil wells? As we speak right now, the majority of the board membership is run by the private sector. That for the last 2 years, when was the last time you see any underperformance from KPLC? They turn it around. So the same thing applies to, for example, to KPC. Now that they shift it within the hands of the private sector, if you talk about National Infrastructure Fund, that will be private-led, which means they can only invest where there is value, then that tells you we are in one way also handling the governance issue. And I think yesterday that came out very clearly.
But there was no governance. There was no governance issue with the KPC.
No,
there's no governance issue with the Safaricom.
No, yeah, but for for the two,
yes, it did.
Listen, for the two, you are divesting. Actually, it is a question of maximizing what return they give the Kenya government as a shareholder to us setting up this National Infrastructure Fund, so that whatever comes out of this National Infrastructure Fund, how it is led, how the projects will be identified, it will be on a value proposition. And that is why, in fact, I picked that yesterday on the governance issue, where they mentioned clearly that this one will not be run by the politically connected. It will not be these boards whereby political orphans, people who lose positions, are going to be given such jobs. That is why I'm saying it now comes in as a leverage, so that we ensure we get value for the same.
We don't, of course, take special umbrage with the debt. Of course we do, but we have a problem with the spending of it. Yeah, getting and accumulating money is not the problem. Yeah. We've seen the budget policy statements.
Yes.
A lot of, you're talking about, where will we have a headroom also to borrow other money? We need to be very creative in how we are getting financial instruments at the end of the day. But the question is, even when we get all this money, it is going to recurrent expenditure, right? More than what should be allocated to even development.
Health is recurrent.
If you look,
30% health.
Let's hear from...
I think I'll answer that after she's gone.
But the recurrent is also the renovation of State House.
Let her speak first. Renovation of State House, building of very many state lodges that are unnecessary. You ask yourself, what is the point of all these state lodges when previous presidents have survived in power without necessarily needing the state lodges, and constantly renovating State House after every 3 months. You wonder, what is it that is being renovated about State House? In fact, the way it has been renovated right now, it has lost its original value. You know, the value of it being a historic... a relic, a heritage site, you know. You ask yourself this, and I've had the president who, at the launch of the National Infrastructure Fund, he seems to be banking a lot on the Safaricom deal, which is currently being contested in court by Kenyans who have gone to court and they've said this is unconstitutional, who have gone to court and they've said where is the participation of Kenyans in this, what is the maximum value, are Kenyans going to get the maximum value out of this particular deal? So you ask yourself, if it falls through, what will happen? Because it seems like that is where they're banking. It's like the backdrop of this whole National Infrastructure Fund. If it falls through in the court system, what happens? And again, I asked earlier, is it that our government lacks legal advisors, or what is it? Because clearly the Safaricom deal was something that somebody with basic legal education should have known that this is unconstitutional. And again, and I think this headstrongness that government goes with to deals and to new projects and new ideas they come up with, in as much to the point where they don't care necessarily what the law says, what the constitution says, what our structures and systems of governance say, is something that really needs to be addressed. Earlier on when he was speaking, I heard him saying that Kenya has not been forced to come up with, to undertake IMF programs, you know, restructuring programs that would have affected us greatly. He forgets that the Gen Z protests were actually part of the backdrop of the Gen Z protests. Was part of it was addressing the issue of finance, of the issue of IMF. And it's because of the Gen Z protests that Kenyans no longer had now to undertake this particular structural reforms that IMF was trying to force upon us. But had we not had the Gen Z protests, we would be struggling right now under the reforms of IMF, and we would have so many Kenyans who would have lost jobs, because one of the requirements of the IMF was that, you know, people would have to be laid off in a way to be able to manage the debt that we do have as a country. So I think again, there's a lot of thinking and reasoning that needs to go behind what the government does. There's
and
a lot
privatization is not really stimulated by the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions, as it were. Yeah.
The IMF has a...
Yeah, you'll come to it.
Okay,
I was just putting, you know, spanning the works as well.
Yes, I think, as I was saying, that these conversations around financing, around debt, around the economy need to be reduced into language that is understood by Kenyans, so that we don't just sit here, we are blabbering big words and big English, when Kenyans at the end of the day, all they care about, by the way, right now, go and talk to Mama Mboga out here, go and talk to a boda person out here, the very people that this government came into power to protect or to assist. Ask them what matters to you at the end of the day when it comes to the Kenyan economy. They don't care about the Bretton Woods institutions. They don't care about this National Infrastructure Fund. All they care about is that at the end of the day, will I have made money in my pocket enough to be able to pay school fees, enough that if I get a sickness in my family, to take care of it, enough to be able to take care of my day-to-day needs, enough to even save some for a rainy day. That is all that matters to them. These very many things we keep talking about does not matter at all. And by the way, remember, when this government came to power, one of the reasons why they were able to convince a majority of people to vote for them was because they really simplified their language when they were talking to Kenyans. They made it look like all the Kenyans should care about was money in their pockets. And then right now we are sitting here and we are saying it's not about money in the pockets, it's about the stabilization of the economy, it's about making sure our debt is this and that. And yet when you entered into power, you said, at the end of the day, all we care about is you having money in your pocket. Pesa mfukoni. I remember Musalia Mudavadi very well saying, Pesa mfukoni. That was his rallying call.
Yes.
Yeah, it was his rallying call during the elections. But right now, the Kenyan citizen, if asked, uko na pesa mfukoni, the answer will be absolutely no.
I think the inaction is too much a price to pay for governance, and there's no room for inaction. Any government that is in place, or any political leader or any leader seeks to be in office, one of the major things you have to wake up to reality to is that inaction is not an option. At whatever cost, you must be consequential, and you must try things, and you have to do things to work. So I want to give that as a backdrop to understand the false dichotomy that comes in terms of what was the promise and what has been delivered.